Welcome to the Energy Summit. This session is about remote and mobile assets and how to connect them through WAN and SD-WAN solutions. It's brought to us by Pete Kavanaugh from Cisco. Enjoy.
I'm normally based in Ireland, but actually this week for a couple of days I'm over in the UK. But it's frankly the same weather. It's raining outside, so all doom and gloom no matter where I go. But it's good to know that a lot. I guess majority of the audience are from North America because that means I need to consciously say router instead of router. So I'm going to keep myself in check on that one. Um, but yeah, look, as there's only a couple of topics I wanted to go through today. Really, in general, some of the kind of ways we can look at different WAN deployments across the energy sector. So kind of, although there may be a lot of differences, what are the commonalities and how we can compare and contrast those? Kind of dig into the requirements and capabilities that the industry kind of brings to the table and then some of the kind of tools we have in our disposal to go and solve those problems. And then spend a little bit longer on SD-WAN in particular, because I think that's a relatively new topic. To Roland's point, I think SD-WAN in general, across many, many verticals in the industrial IoT space, including, some of the ones I've spent more time in, but also more recently in the energy sector, is something that's, really, I guess, coming at it from two directions. One is, vendors like Cisco and our partners are kind of helping customers understand some of the capabilities of software-defined networking and SD-WAN in particular, and how that can be relevant for what they're doing. But also, we're actually seeing a healthy pull from our own customers to say, hey, maybe we're already doing SD-WAN on the corporate side, on the IT side. Our IT, brethren are kind of saying, hey, it's working great for us. How would it work for you guys? And as we know, not everything enterprise IT necessarily always translates directly into OT. So that, again, there's a couple of things we want to watch out for there. But in general, there's a lot of great things we can take advantage of. So if we look at some of the spectrums here to compare this, right, you can argue about kind of relative numbers here, but if I look at deployment size, maybe small is up to 1,000, medium is kind of 1 to 5,000, and then large being, 5,000 or more. And then here I'm talking about like connected sites, connected locations. Each location itself may have, many, many endpoints or, OT assets you're connecting and care about, but I'm just kind of talking about the sites themselves. And then also, we can look at things like the use case complexity. So now we're kind of saying, okay, um, is a use case simple, medium level of complexity, or very complex? And we have a variety here because maybe we could have, a small number of locations, but they each one of those is doing a very complex set of use cases. Equally, we could have like 10,000 locations, but everyone is a cookie cutter of the previous one and just doing one single job for one department. So as we kind of look across these things, there's going to be a variety. So if we take maybe a starting example, something like a smaller kiosk, the location size itself is going to be small. The quantity of them, though, could be, a handful, but it could scale to kind of like thousands and thousands of these sites. Challenges we often see here are like limited power budget, maybe even it has to be solar powered, and limited space. We can't have a whole 6 foot high, 19-inch rack of stuff, right? It has to be kind of small. In general, though, the use cases are simple and the stakeholders are single. So there's really kind of one stakeholder, one department that kind of cares about this and has to kind of make it happen. And maybe we're kind of maybe doing like monitored assets for one or a small number of assets. So kind of simple, but maybe, where there's lots of these going on. From our perspective, maybe this is a kind of a valve or a meter station. Something like the Cisco IR1101 router is going to be a good fit. It's a small box, right? It's, as you can see here, in its simplest form, it's a very, very small DIN rail mounted box without any additional modules. And in this form, with a single cellular card just ticking over in the background, it's going to be typically drawing, less than 10 watts of power. Now, of course, at boot up and in other times, that wattage will increase and decrease. But in general, for us, less than 10 watts is, a figure we see quite common there. Often as well, these smaller sites, their way out of that location is going to be cellular. So for us, it's really important to have a set of capabilities around private 4G, 5G, and then public 4G, 5G, which includes a private APN. And in this instance, if it's private or with a private APN, we see customers deploying not necessarily with a VPN because they're seeing that as a trusted part of their network. Really, that's customer choice. So you can absolutely do, a Cisco VPN over and on top of a private 4G, 5G, or a private APN service. But at this point, we also see customers have the choice to say, actually, as a trusted part of my network, we don't necessarily need a VPN. As we look at public 4G, 5G with a public APN, very much, we would advocate for, a VPN, something like a Flex VPN based solution with maybe something like a Catalyst 8000 Flex VPN heading cluster or separate clusters across geos for kind of, high availability. And then we have a product called Cisco IoT Operations Dashboard. And this is a really, really great product for managing kind of small, medium, and large quantities of simple, small gateways doing, simple jobs. That's not to say what they're doing is not important. I mean, I'm sure that the single job they're doing for that single department is incredibly important, but just it's a simple proposition. It's very cookie cutter. Like I could have a group of 5,000 of these. The configuration of every member of that group is going to be almost identical, apart from maybe different host names and different, like loopback IP addresses, for example. But potentially everything else could just be like negotiated and dynamic and all based on the same template. So from that perspective, really bringing the TCO down, really making the OpEx kind of work well here. That's a kind of a simple kind of smaller solution we would see as a key building block. Maybe going a little bit bigger, we're now looking at maybe medium-sized locations. And then because they are medium-sized, we would expect maybe not to go into the large numbers of these being out there. So maybe the quantity itself is small to medium. But we start to have a couple more challenges crop up now. Now it's maybe not just a single, use case, and not just a single stakeholder, but potentially, several stakeholders, and each of the use cases may be of a medium complexity, right? So now the challenge is around how do we actually segment some of that traffic across, and what kind of various SLAs do we need to have in place? So maybe we're acting kind of as almost like an SP for the various kind of OT teams that are working this. What SLAs do they expect from us? And, as one set of use cases may be more important than another, how do we kind of make that happen on the network? Maybe this is something like, a small pump station or a compressor station. Here we could use the Cisco IR1101 as well, because there's not necessarily the need to bring a really big box to the table if a small box can do the job really, really well. But now we would potentially look at having an extra module for a second card. And over the top of this now, we can have two cellular cards, one 5G, the other 4G, or two 4G cards, with 4 SIM cards in total across them. So a lot of flexibility on the WAN in terms of how am I gonna, have different connections and have different cellular providers, giving myself the high availability I'm looking for. But as well as that, we have a module we can add on to add serial, because we're dealing with more complex use cases, connecting more devices. A lot of the devices we're going to see are kind of the classic kind of 232, 485. So the ability for us to have those via a serial connection into the same router is, a really good capability, and maybe some additional Ethernet modules as well. Although when you're looking at a box like this, we need to be careful about not overloading it. So we can't necessarily kind of run every single port at line rate at all times. So it's just, there's always a scaling and sizing conversation here. But in general, we've got good flexibility. And here in example 2, something like SD-WAN is potentially, now a good fit. Again, I'm not saying operations dashboard is the only solution for example 1, or nor is SD-WAN the only solution for example 2. But as an example, because we've now got this increasing segmentation requirement, we've got different VPN tunnels, different WAN paths potentially there, the VLANs and VRFs and other kind of technical constructs that come along with that. It's just inherently more complex, right? So how can we maybe simplify that with a software-defined WAN layer that allows us to kind of, take care of that in a much simpler way, but also still leverage kind of groups and templates. So, this is a pump station, but maybe I've got like 50 pump stations. Well, I don't want to go manually configure 50 things individually. How can I kind of go through a process to have them automatically configured and inheriting a bunch of kind of golden config I've created at that kind of parent group level? So this is potentially kind of an interesting fit for us in this space as well. And then maybe going slightly bigger now into example 3, the plant. It's a large kind of facility.
Pete,
Yes,
before you leave example 2 there, if you can go back for a second. Sorry, I had myself on mute and no one was hearing me. All good. No, this is great. I noticed that you had the extra module for serial ports there, which is really interesting. We've had a few really good use cases in pipeline examples where there's old equipment out at some of these sites that are primarily managed through serial. This is
Yeah.
one way that you can connect serial equipment that needs management remotely, but it's difficult to do. You can tie that right into this box directly. And we've seen a few people do that really, really successfully in these types of deployments. And I know the old equipment's out there, so
Yeah.
it's not something that you can replace in a lot of cases. And so this is one way to connect that in management as well. And I believe that's all templatable as well, if I understand correctly, in the management platforms.
Yeah, this is a pretty much a brand new module, so I would need to double check on exactly which level of code is required to support it, and if there are any kind of terms and conditions that come along with it. But in general, absolutely roll on what you're saying, and we see two uses of serial in this context. We see the ability to take serial kind of natively into the box, into our edge compute function, and actually interact with that serial kind of at the edge of the network. Or more simply, we see the ability to encapsulate that legacy serial over the IP network, have it go back across an encrypted WAN, back to the kind of management center, break it out again, and have that kind of legacy serial interaction over a modern secured IP network. So both of those are very possible for us as well.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that 485 is something that you see a fair bit out there in the older equipment as well, and that wasn't there native in the serial port on the 1101. So this extra module
Yeah,
is worth noting.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So on the larger one, right, it's just getting larger, more complex. I think here now we're definitely dealing with many stakeholders, and the use cases are probably up at the complex end of the spectrum. Uh, the extra thing we're more likely to see in the large locations is the enterprise influence. So now if I've got like workers kind of visiting, right, the enterprise team might say, well, hey, can we extend the enterprise network out there as well? So now I think we're definitely looking at a spot where they've got various SLAs, potentially some extended enterprise traffic in there. Resiliency requirements are ramped up now. We probably want no single points of failures. We want, separate boxes, separation and stacking and things like that. But we still have got limited rack space. We haven't got like an infinite data center we can kind of have at these locations. So then for us, something like the Cisco IR1101 router is a really good fit because it's doing a couple of things for us in a very compact form factor. It's a 2 rack unit ruggedized router. It can do precision time protocol, which is potentially kind of more interesting for these larger, more complex situations. We've seen a huge push in this kind of router portfolio refresh around doubling down on the security capabilities. So like, zone-based firewall and IPS, and the IPS isn't there right now, but it's something that's planned for later in the year. But in general, we know that the IPS capabilities there in the platform, things like, AMP, advanced malware protection, URL filtering, all those kind of security integrations are completely in the platform. Similarly, kind of multiple WAN paths. Right now, we're kind of dealing with actually I've got separate WAN connections. Maybe they actually cost me different amounts of money. So I want to route traffic some over one of them because it's high priority traffic, and then maybe I want to send the less important stuff over a separate path, which is maybe it's be slightly slower or a slightly smaller pipe, whatever it may be. I need the control to do that. At this point, I will be saying to you, Cisco SD-WAN is probably the only scalable way to do it unless you want to have like, thousands of CCIEs on staff, because you can absolutely do the very fine-grained control with classic Cisco, iOS CLI, but it's just complicated. It's hard work. And then, each box is individual and it kind of doesn't scale. Software-defined WAN is a way of kind of saying, I want to do all these complex things, but I want to do them in a simple way. And I know this is primarily a WAN session, but I'm just kind of throwing in the fact we've got the IE9300 switches, which are a really great complement in this larger site kind of construct with a stacking capability to again have remove single points of failure. So they're a good fit to go alongside the IR8340. So I know we've seen a lot of differences, but there's a lot of commonalities as well. So one thing we hear from customers across all the verticals, right, is the ability to do like plug and play or zero touch deployment is key, right? The ability to have the OT staff be able to go out and do simple rollouts in the field itself without doing a complex set of staging, back at base first. This is a great capability to have, and it's something that we've really kind of focused on and are able to deliver across the portfolio. But at the same time, the ability for the IT team or the kind of the networking experts to have that oversight of control over the configuration. So you've got the best of both worlds. You can plug and play, but then when you plug and play, you get a good config on there. So this golden config concept is really important because essentially we're saying it's an IT blessed set of CLI or even in a CLI-less world with intent-based networking, it's an IT-blessed kind of set of policy and control that gets pushed to these boxes. And then lastly here, there's a real common requirement for visibility, to the visibility of the network devices themselves, but increasingly of the networking for and of the OT devices and assets that sit underneath those networking devices. So how do we kind of deliver that in part of our management platforms is a key capabilities as well. I think some emerging capabilities we're seeing is, yes, sir.
Um, can I back you up again to the previous slide?
Yep.
There was a question in the chat around the ISR platforms. Now I know ISRs aren't necessarily your core, but question around just SD-WAN, the SD-WAN software in general. Is most of the segmentation pieces that you talked about, is most of the and routing capabilities, is that native to the SD-WAN software? So anywhere the SD-WAN software runs, for the most part, it works?
Yes, so I guess two things. One is that the industrial routers, the IRs, are very closely related to the ISRs, the enterprise routers. They share a lot of the
Okay.
same software and hardware components. The industrial routers are effectively, it's an oversimplification, but they're ruggedized versions of the enterprise routers, right?
Okay.
So in general, everything you can do on an enterprise router and anything you can do specifically with SD-WAN features to do with segmentation and stuff, you can do on the industrial routers, typically at a slightly smaller scale number because we really have to value the high temperature capabilities, the fanless, passively cooled stuff on the industrial boxes. So potentially the performance is not quite comparable to the enterprise boxes, but from a feature perspective, we should expect in general, almost all the features to work across between the two platforms. From a software
Yeah, and you
perspective,
mentioned,
yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I guess another follow-on question, you mentioned fanless, but all of those passive cooling features and all of that have been introduced into the industrial models that you just mentioned, right? Those are all, that's part of the deal.
Yeah, I'll just flash up a quick slide in a minute showing the portfolio, but absolutely, yeah. The
Okay,
fact
cool.
they're all fanless, they're all passively cooled. Gives us those really high MTBF figures and then the reliability our customers need in these verticals for sure. So just the emerging capabilities we're seeing, a lot of customers are interested in how can we collapse functions where it's appropriate. So, you know, we can do a lot of kind of firewall and security capabilities in the newer routers, and where that makes sense and that is a good fit for the deployment it's going into. It's a great capability to be able to have because now we're literally, saving the cost of a box and the rack space and ongoing kind of OpEx cost of a box in a remote location. So it's great to have that capability as well. And then precision time is becoming more and more important for the kind of advanced use cases that require that level of synchronization. And we've got a much broader set of precision time support on our boxes as well, versus customers having a dedicated timing appliance. Similarly, edge computing and app hosting, all of the boxes we make today have an edge computing and app hosting capability. Effectively, there's some Cisco specific software that we can follow up separately on, but there's also the bring your own Docker, right? You can bring your own Docker, you can deploy it on the box. An example I gave earlier was, for example, if say you wanted to interact with that RS-485 serial kind of at the edge and interact with some legacy equipment and do some edge-based use cases, you could write your code in a Docker, have it via the router, have access to those interfaces, and kind of get that stuff done. So that's an example of bring your own Docker. But frankly, the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want there. Security is key, and our Cisco CyberVision products giving us the layer 2 visibility and specifically a bunch of extra work around OT protocol deep packet inspection like SCADA and Modbus and other things like that. This runs natively on the 1101 and 8340 in the edge compute footprint, and really gives you that enhanced visibility at the protocol level in terms of what's going on. So that's an emerging capability that customers really like to see. So just on SD-WAN a bit quicker. So the deployment choice, we can have it hosted by Cisco in the cloud, and we scale that out appropriately at no additional cost to the customer. So if you start with 10 sites and expand to 1,000 sites, we just magically expand the back end to kind of cope with that, and you're entitled to that as you buy the SD-WAN licensing from us. Equally, you're entitled to deploy it on premises. So in that case, we give you some OVAs. We give you the VM specs, you stand up the SD-WAN backend in your own data center. And this is more common for utility customers who can't have stuff on the public internet, need stuff on private networks. It's a much more common deployment pattern we're seeing. On the component side, there's kind of, I guess, four key components. One is the vBond orchestration plane, the vSmart control plane, the vManage management plane, and the WAN edge router itself. This is that's a regular router, but it's in a WAN edge function. And this whole separation of planes is very much kind of a theme of software-defined networking, software-defined WAN. So it kind of looks complex, looks like there's a lot of boxes involved, but they're all doing a key job and doing it well and scaling out, horizontally and vertically well behind that. And there's very good reasons for having it done that way. This is the slide I was talking about. So, across all of our routers, which are kind of relevant to the energy space, all of them can do SD-WAN now, right? So they can all be what we call SD-WAN WAN edge routers. All you do is either at time of ordering in the Cisco ordering tool, you tell it you want it to come from the factory set up to be an SD-WAN router, or even if you forgot to do that, when you get it, you just tell it to boot up in controller mode, and that's all you need to do. There's nothing special. It just kind of knows what to do after that. Also possible is the IR 1800 family, which I haven't shown here because it's more for typically seen in kind of mobile vehicle type scenarios, but that can also be an SD-WAN box as well. Very quickly, very briefly, just take you through the onboarding flow. So as you take a new SD-WAN box out the brown Cisco cardboard box, plug it in, power it on, it goes through a plug and play onboarding process, which works completely seamlessly based on cellular interfaces and Ethernet interfaces. It connects to the vBond server. It does a certificate authority-based secure onboarding workflow. The new router then is part of the control plane and can communicate with the vSmart server. And once that's done over a DTLS tunnel, it can communicate with vManage, where vManage then pushes the configuration down to the box. And this is where we're starting to leverage kind of groups and templates and policies that you've built up and want to just kind of, cookie cutter, this is a pumping station. I'm going to use my pumping station group. Done, right? This new router can now form dynamic tunnels with existing routers. So once the configuration is pushed down there, it can now automatically connect to whatever it's supposed to connect to in your network without you going kind of giving any specific instructions. So, like I said earlier, I think SD-WAN allows you to do complex things simply. So all of this is possible with traditional Cisco CLI, but you'd need to be a CCA, frankly, to kind of make it happen. So we're able to do things that would previously be unattainable in a kind of very scalable way. The secure onboarding and auto VPN capability is really, really key. I've spoken to customers who said, as soon as we were on public cellular networks and had to have the headache of working out the VPN strategy and how we're going to manage pre-shared keys and how we're going to manage certificate authorities, that's a lot of work. SD-WAN was a no-brainer for us. That itself was the tipping point. They said, we're just going to go SD-WAN because it's plug and play, and then it's auto VPN, right? So that's a huge value proposition in and of itself. The macro segmentation capability is kind of really powerful as well. So I can define networks kind of green, orange, purple, whatever you want. And I can say, I'm defining them and I want some of them here and some of them there. And you take care of the routing and the policy to make that happen. I'm just telling you from a very simple perspective, I've got these 5 networks. I want 3 here and 2 here, make it happen, right? So you're not there manually configuring like, ACLs or anything like that. Topology control is also really important. So you can say, I'm going to allow spoke-to-spoke communications, or I'm going to maybe only allow hub and spoke. So even though these 2 locations are close to each other, I might want to send all that traffic back via my headquarters, my data center, because I need to maybe put it through some filtering or some firewalls. So that's doable as well. Multi-WAN control. So now I'm saying, actually, I've got multiple WAN paths and providers. Like we were talking about earlier, is it maybe a bandwidth consideration? Is it a quality of service consideration? Is it a cost consideration? Especially on cellular, like data costs matter, right? I might have different cellular plans. I might want to steer certain traffic different times of the day over different WAN paths. How can I have a scalable way of doing that with policy control? And in general, what's common is, like the groups, templates, policies I've spoken about is a key kind of construct to doing all of this. And then I guess last but not least is security. So security with the auto VPN certificate authority strong encryption based thing right from the get-go, but then in general on each box, each box can act, zone-based firewall, AMP, 802.1x, and endpoint or AAA authentication, deep packet inspection, right? All of these things are possible. And I guess, with the common security pieces, we're actually doing a lot more innovation in the vManage management platform, throughout the rest of this calendar year to really create really nice UI workflows to actually help the administrator say, this is what I want to do. I'm going to execute this workflow. It's going to take me through step by step what I want to do. And then, it's going to go and execute it for me at the end and tell me when it's done. So having a workflow based approach is really important as well. So I guess, almost just to close out here, right? So as you look at your WAN deployments, for simple configs, you're going to deploy simply, maybe where there's no VPN requirements. It's a single use case, maybe a single department. IoT operations dashboard is a really great fit on the management platform side. It's very, very cost effective. You can get up and running very, very quickly, and it can scale to very large deployments of lots of small sites. For more complex scenarios where segmentation is more of a key care about, how do you have that policy control I was talking about? Cisco SD-WAN is a great fit. I mean, in general, like the more complex a scenario, the better SD-WAN is as a fit, because it's going to help you solve those kind of complex problems. And then we didn't really mention it much here, but it's certainly a key component in the utility space now. Cisco Field Networking Director. This really scales into the massive numbers. You're dealing with like kind of large AMI type deployments. FND is a really great fit, and is gonna scale really big there. And I guess lastly, and just I added this in, based on some of the comments I heard, DNA Center is also, an option. It's an on-premises option. Most of what we've been talking about here is on the WAN side, the routing side. But if you've got a lot of switching components and there's a desire, or maybe the team structure aligns to have those managed by the same groups of people, then DNA Center has, really strong capabilities in terms of managing both kind of routers and switches. So that's a consideration as well, and we can certainly going to have, follow-ups on that. So just in summary, right, there are a variety of WAN deployment types within a single customer. One size does not fit all. It's a consideration, like, plug and play segmentation and policy control are key attributes across the solutions. I think the Cisco industrial router portfolio in this recent refresh has really kind of come on leaps and bounds. Every single box we have in the portfolio now can be an SD-WAN WAN edge. Higher speeds, greater modularity, all the industrial ratings you're going to need to apply it to the right verticals. But the other thing to say here is that really there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. There's like the analysis you do to look at what problems you're trying to solve, what the use cases are, everything that comes along with that. You put it into the equation, and you'll get something that comes out the other side. And Cisco's certainly here to help you make that successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks a lot, Pete, for that. And I'll tell you, I mean, you talked about ways of managing, and you talked about Flex VPN. Like, a lot of this stuff takes me back to working with customers with thousands of sites who manage these sites on spreadsheets not that many years ago, right? And now we've got multiple different management platforms depending on the complexity and type of sites that you're talking about, right? And I think what's probably fair to say is that a lot of the larger deployment environments have probably a combination of requirements, right? It might not make sense to take SD-WAN into a kiosk, but it definitely would make sense to take SD-WAN into some of the larger, more complex sites. And so a lot of times we'll see two different deployment models with actually multiple tiered requirements like you laid out. So this is really helpful.
Yeah,
thanks a lot.
Another aspect, Roland, is the actual like data usage. So some of these are more sensitive to data usage than others, and SD-WAN has come from the enterprise space, right? So right now there wasn't really a consideration about how much data it uses. So just to give you an example, if you just had an SD-WAN router somewhere, and even if you had nothing plugged into it and you were sending no traffic through it per se, it itself, with its own kind of like heartbeat traffic and quality traffic and SLA traffic and everything else, will generate a significant amount of traffic. And if you're really watching the dollars and cents on a data plan, that is potentially consideration. And contrast that with some of the stuff we've done with optimizing for Flex VPN over cellular over probably the past decade. We've had a very strong focus on how can we kind of strike a balance between keeping visibility in terms of what's going on, but making it as least chatty as possible on those protocols. So again, cost is a consideration, and that might help drive the solution as well.
Wow, that's a great consideration. So I know that you've been working on some documents, right? So I don't know if they're validated designs or reference architectures or what you call them. Can you talk a little bit about that, and kind of when we're expecting some of this, if it's not out already?
Yeah, we're certainly working, I guess, within the IoT business unit and also with our enterprise colleagues. I mean, SD-WAN is a much bigger thing across Cisco. So there's like the IoT industrial perspective on it, and we're doing some documentation that kind of shows some of the deltas and some of the specific things to look out for there. But we're also making sure we're tying into the larger Cisco kind of enterprise level SD-WAN documentation. So we're working very closely with the SD-WAN technical marketing team and product management teams. So as they produce, general kind of validated designs for SD-WAN and other collateral, there's going to be chapters in there on industrial kind of IoT
Oh, okay.
type scenarios as well. So that there's certainly some documentation out there today, Roland, but there's also a lot of documentation work underway right now across various teams in Cisco to go along with the fact that all of our routers in the industrial space have this capability. We're now backing it up with a bunch of kind of documentation and collateral to help it, demystify that.
Thank you for joining us for this session. If you found value in this session, please like and subscribe and click on the next video. Take care.